Welcome back to the Bazaar. I'm Inco, and I've been grinding a ton of Stelle lately. Right now I'm at rank 31, I peaked at around 16 or 17 earlier today, and I don't have it in me to try to climb out top 10, and especially not top 1, because it's so competitive at the top of the ladder. But I played a ton of Stelle, and I'd like to put out a guide for my current best understanding of Stelle. They have a lot to add to the conversation. There's some other guides going around that say things I disagree with, so I'd like to throw my own 2 cents in. I guess first, let's pop over to my stats, huh? So selecting Stelle as my hero, popping down, you can see I have 94 games played, 68 of them at 10 wins, which comes out to be a 72% win rate. And if we just look at games played of 94, pop down to the 876 players defeated, that comes out to be about 9.2 wins per game, which is frankly ridiculous. Not ridiculous enough to even crack the top 10, apparently, but still very, very good stats. I'm very proud of how I've done on Stelle. And as a preface to everything I'm about to say, the Bazaar is a stupidly complicated and incredibly high variance game with a ton of nuance to all of its decision making. There are going to be situations where edge cases are true, where things I say are false. The best item in the game is awful on some boards, and the worst item in the game is the best item possible for some boards. So take what I say with a grain of salt, understand that every decision is nuanced, yada yada. Additionally, I could just be overlooking something. Top 20 doesn't mean I'm right. Hell, top 1 wouldn't have meant I'm right. So while I have a lot I think I can teach people, I am not saying that any of this is concrete fact, and certainly it's not universally true, because nothing is in the Bazaar. Now, since the game's so complicated, I think it's best to start with the general gameplay balance of Stelle. How do I think she fares at each stage of the game? What are you expecting to win? And this is important to understand. When you're playing any character, you need to understand, is my goal to win on day 10 or 11? Am I comfortable winning on days 13 and 14? And so as a result, you need to understand the power curve of your character and when you should be really pushing tempo and trying to get your wins, because it does matter a lot. I would say it matters the least out of anyone for Stelle, but it does matter a lot for Stelle anyway. The reason I think it matters the least for Stelle is because I think very firmly that Stelle is the strongest character. To talk about how strong she is at different phases of the game, I would divide it into 4 different parts. I would say that the Bazaar has an early game that stays 1 through 4, which is when you have very low health values, and on the first 2 you're even missing board slots. A mid game that stays 5 through 8. That's when you don't have enchants yet. At least the vast majority of builds don't have enchant yet, and your health hasn't really scaled up yet. You're still kind of frail. Then you have the beginning of the late game on 9 through 12, where you're starting to get your enchants, you've had time to assemble your combos, but your health values, while they aren't small, haven't really scaled outrageously yet. And then you have the ultra late game, where everyone's health values are ballooning into unreasonable numbers, people have already died, so survivorship bias starts taking effect, and you start seeing way more obsidian enchants, way more crazy combos, way less average results. And in these 4 phases of the game, for 3 of them, I think Stelle is the strongest character in the game. In the early game, I think the only person competing with Stelle is Vanessa. No one else has as powerful boards on the first 4 days as Stelle does. It's only Vanessa that can compete, but Vanessa is far less consistent at generating those boards. So Stelle is, in my opinion, definitely the king of the early game. Moving on to the mid game, you haven't got your enchants yet, but you're getting your gold builder rounds. Everyone's still got relatively low health. All the things that make Stelle really strong in the early game, add in the large gold builder round items. She continues to dominate straight to the mid game. She doesn't need enchants. Having low health values, if anything, benefits her because she's playing predominantly burn and damage boards. And into the late game is when some people say that Stelle falls off. I don't agree with that take. I think by far Stelle is at her strongest on days 9 through 12. When Stelle is getting her enchants, making her explosive combos with her best builds even more powerful, had time to assemble everything she needs for those combos, and being the smallest card pool, the most consistent hero at assembling those combos, I think Stelle doesn't fall off at all before about day 13, when health values start getting absurd, and Stelle needs to have some serious damage scaling to keep pace with them. Now, in the ultra late game, once everyone's assembled all their combos, survivorship bias is in full effect, yeah, it's hard for Stelle to compete. But realistically, it's hard for literally everyone who isn't Pig past day 12. And even for Pig, it's hard because everyone alive is so powerful if you're alive at all, right? If you get to day 16, I tend to find I'm more afraid of a day 16 Vanessa than a day 16 Pig. That could just be a normal ass Pig run. The Vanessa did something deranged to get there. So yes, I don't think Stelle is better than Pig in the ultra late game, but as far as second place goes, I think Stelle is comfortably second place because between Hanger and Launch Tower Runabout builds, Stelle has multiple insane builds that either severely disrupt her opponent or start off instantaneously, which are the most important things to do in the ultra late game, aside from just having 100,000 health and one-shotting your opponent, which Pig is the best at. So I wouldn't say she's the best in the late game. I would say she's the best everywhere else, and she's not bad at all in the ultra late game. I definitely would suggest when you're playing Stelle, you should be aiming to win early. You should be expecting to get out very frequently on days 10, 11, 12. You should not be expecting to do something where you're going to stabilize late. That is generally a bad plan with less room for error across every hero, even Pygmalion. So with Stelle being so strong early, you should definitely play to that strength, but I do not agree with the sentiment I've seen online that Stelle is weak late. That seems like exaggeration to me. She's very, very solid in the late game. And as we start talking about skill vendors and how they interact with Stelle, you'll start to see that Stelle has some disgusting interactions with some of the diamond skills in the game and can do way, way more work with them than most characters can. Now, to start giving more specific advice about Stelle, we need to talk about the 3 general lines there are with Stelle. There's a ton of different ways your early game and mid game might play out, but generally you're angling towards one of 3 build plans. I'm going to start with the one that I think is the strongest and most consistent, and that is airborne weapons. Typically speaking, those sorts of builds want to play with Kara because it's the best flight enabler and the buff to all of your flying weapons, and they also want to play with aerial turret, because this is just inevitability. Even if you have nothing but an aerial turret, it will eventually kill your opponent. But you can have so much more than just an aerial turret. We'll get into some of the mid-game boards for this in a second. But these 2 cards being so common because there are relatively few weapons and relatively few medium items at bronze allows you to really reliably build Kara plus aerial turret and then build out your board from there to threaten about a 15-second kill with minimum support. With just Kara plus aerial turret, you're looking at the aerial turret going nuclear, that is firing twice a second at 15 seconds. It would take 28 seconds with literally nothing else, and there's a ton of other support you can add to make this go faster. Headset for the flight haste, jetpack to just haste it the hard way, joystick to speed it up. There are plenty of things you do to make aerial turret faster, and you want to be doing all of those in aerial turret builds, but the consistency of aerial turret plus Kara is the main thing that makes this line so consistent. And a lot of the stuff you do to get this in flight, a lot of the stuff that you're doing to buff it and build towards your damage weapon plan, builds very smoothly into Runabout in the mid game. And Runabout is not like a mid game stopgap or anything. Runabout is by far the strongest build Stelle has, in my opinion. It builds from her most consistent and most powerful early game, and Runabout can be just like the best thing you can do as early as day 2. It's pretty rare you find one on day 2. It's honestly kind of rare in my experience I even have it by day 3 or 4. But basically, if I'm playing weapons, when I find Runabout, at most, I'm running the aerial turret for 1 or 2 more days. I'm usually switching into Runabout immediately. And Runabout is incredibly strong. Being a multicast 2 item that can go down to 1 speed is an insane carrier as a damage delivery system. Its base damage is already good in the first place. And there's a lot of different things, we'll talk about them as the guide goes on to get this into flight. But the most powerful thing you can do with Runabout is to build into Launch Tower. Launch Tower is start of each fight, all your vehicles start flying. Because there are 2 vehicles that are 1-slot vehicles granting flight, the Flysicle and Ornithopter, and a headset when your items start flying, give them haste, you can build Launch Tower boards where you start combat, all your vehicles begin flying, gain haste. You might have a 2 or 3 second runabout at the start of combat with haste, and then pretty immediately, sometimes literally immediately, like the first second, you're going to fly several more items and go down to 1 second pretty much off the bat. Tomorrow, I'll post a video going through my climb to top 20 legend, and you'll see a ton of builds where I'm doing start of combat Launch Tower runabout and just obliterating my opponents. I'm expecting the ladder to get a lot more hostile after I post this guide, because we're going to start seeing a lot more Launch Tower runabout. It is by far Stelle's strongest line. When I say Stelle is not really unfavored in the late game, it's because I've had so many Stelle games where I had start of combat flight, and I just got in under the raid boss pigs with instantaneous start of combat runabout shenanigans. You can get runabout to huge values, and this can get you 0 startup time on the build. If you miss it, you'll often play a much more fair version, use something like Vortex Cannon or Hang Glider to get most of your stuff into flight, or all of your stuff into flight. If you miss that, you're probably going into like Ornithopter to lower the fly cooldown enough that like it's a bit janky, but around 4 seconds in, some things take flight and it's fast enough. It's not instantaneous, it's a lot more piecemeal. You will find a way to get it down to 1 second within the first 5 seconds of combat, pretty much guaranteed when you're playing Runabout. And if you miss the Runabout while you're playing Aerial Turret, then those same things I was just talking about, namely the Hang Glider, is a very, very valid transition. Vortex Cannon could just take place of Kara on a wide weapon board and start scaling the Vortex Cannon. Typically, I don't recommend that. I'll talk about it more when I break down all the large gold items, but it's not like you're locked into finding exactly Runabout. If you're on a good run, you can go into Skyliner. It's a very, very powerful item, although cooldown 10 seconds with no built-in charge mechanics makes it fairly weak in the late game. But Stelle has some things she can do to accelerate it, and we'll talk about that more in a little while as well. But for me, that's the ideal game flow for Stelle. You go in, you start playing Kara Aerial Turret, you transition to Runabout, and you just keep making Runabout faster and faster each day until it's instantaneous in the late game. And I think that is Stelle's strongest game plan, but it's far from her only game plan. Another very common game plan is the Ball Blaster. This deals a ton of damage and a ton of burn, charge 2 seconds whenever you use another tool, So the game plan in the early game is pretty simple. Find a ball blaster. Again, not that many bronze mediums, not that many weapons. It's fairly reliable to find either Kara, an aerial turret, Kara and a bunch of weapons, or a ball blaster when you go to these vendors. It's kind of hard not to hit one of them. So you can incredibly reliably hit one of these two builds. And with ball blaster, I don't think it's as strong. I've had so many games where at every point in the game, I have taken weapon Stelle into ball blaster Stelle or tool Stelle, and I've won at every day of the game. I have never at any point thought ball blaster is stronger. But what it is it's still really good. It's not better than Stelle's best build line, but neither is any other build on any other character, right? You can't always hit the nuts, and when you miss, ball blaster is a very reliable backup. And it's not just ball blaster that you're building for there. Generally, ball blaster has a couple of different ways it can evolve. One is by going into a steam hose, which is a burn-based tool, so obviously it has synergy there. And having found the steam hose, you might transition your ball blaster into a weather machine build where you start using slow scaling to disrupt your opponent and try to burn them out over time. I find this to be relatively slow, not really the best thing I can be doing, but if you can find a hanger to speed yourself up, slow your opponent down, it can make this incredibly strong. It's absolutely worth pursuing. But that's really getting into the real reason ball blaster is so strong is because it has a late game. If I had to say that any two cards were Stelle's strongest cards, it's Runabout and Hanger. We've talked about Runabout. Hanger is nuts as well. It is 1.5 seconds off the cooldown of, let's be real, every card you're going to run. And for the vast majority of your opponent's cards, 1.5 seconds added to their cooldowns. That is a huge disparity in effect, and it is the reason that tool Stelle has a powerful late game. Generally, when you play Ball Blaster, you're looking to build into a hanger and figure out the specifics of the hanger later. Sometimes it's the steam hose slow build. Other times you'll make cool loops with the pressure heater, where you can use this in addition to fast vehicles like the steam washer, which is just the burn tool vehicle charged off vehicles, and then a source of haste off the low roller, which is a very huge number of haste procs. So there are a couple ways to scale crit off that. That's how the Pill Buggy Exodia comes about, which I'll talk more about in a second. But when you're able to lower the cooldown on this, use it to charge steam engine, charge pressure heater, cripple your opponent's build with the hanger, you can see how that all links together in a really powerful way. Another thing people start doing once they're in the part of the game where they're looking at hangers and starting to try to build in that is Pill Buggy scales obscenely well with increased crit chance. You can have Pill Buggy dealing 4x damage essentially to whatever it says on the card, right? Because it crits the shield value and then crits the damage derived from the shield value. So that's a really powerful effect. And with cards like Goggles, you can see how that very rapid haste off low roller instantly becomes 100% crit. I personally am not a huge fan of Pill Buggy strats. I've used them to success. I have 10-win runs with them. I've seen the #1 guide, well, former #1 now from Little Monk. They had Pill Buggy as like one of the main things they were doing. But for me, it feels like it's a really specific Exodia that still loses to start of combat Runabout. It's a thing to be aware of and a thing to pilot towards sometimes when you're going to hangers, try to get this 100% crit Pill Buggy build. And you can also use it with Workshop as well, with usually some sort of slightly different setup where it's your only vehicle as opposed to just having a bunch of fast vehicles all next to it. So to recap the Ball Blaster line, because I feel like I sort of got off the rails there, Ball Blaster is very strong and very consistent in the early and mid game. Not the strongest thing Stelle can be doing, but always a valid backup while you're pursuing weapons and never a terrible thing to be doing. And it builds incredibly smoothly into Hanger, which is such a humongous source of disruption and power. If you miss the hanger, you can hit Stelle's Workshop as a stopgap, which does very similar, very strong things. And once you're going into this large cooldown reduction item, sometimes you'll be playing for Pill Buggy Exodia. Much more frequently, I find you'll be playing for Steam Hose as just a source of burn scaling with some sort of slow all effect to scale it up. Or alternatively, you might go into a pressure heater build where you have a pressure heater looping very quickly and just destroy your opponent with a massive stack of burn that way. There's a couple of ways for the hanger line to play out. Usually it's something in that ballpark though. While I was editing the guide, I realized I never really went into depth about the Pill Buggy Exodia. It's because I genuinely mean the phrase Exodia when I say it. For Pill Buggy to really excel, it kind of feels like you need this exact board. The Ornithopter could be something else. Instead of being 2 multicast with -1 of the cooldown, you can have it be 3 multicast with a different tool. But to me, it very genuinely feels like the only exceptional Pill Buggy board is this one. You have the hanger to lower the cooldowns of your vehicles. Then you have the low roller, hasting everything, charging the Pill Buggy. All of the haste gives it crit chance. It one-shots your opponent. This is actually so fast that instead of one-shotting your opponent, it frequently hits them twice in like the first 6 seconds. It's very strong. But the reason I don't like it is because of that phrase Exodia. I feel like you need, specifically, hanger, goggles, Pill Buggy, rivet gun. Or maybe a similar thing is possible with Stelle's Workshop. But it doesn't feel to me like there's a flexible path here. It feels like you need such a specific board to make it work. And I know, coming from the Runabout guy, where I'm just telling you to build the same launch tower Runabout board in all your games, this might seem hypocritical. But my issue is that Runabout is good in pretty much every circumstance, and Pill Buggy requires so much support for me to be impressed by it. I cannot overstate how rarely I felt like I was able to play Pill Buggy during my climb, and how frequently I killed people who went into Pill Buggies, and even a couple of Pill Buggies that went into this exact board with Runabout. Anyways, with the Pill Buggy Exodia properly explained now, we can move on to the third normal line through a Stelle game. Now, what do you do if Ayla and Middle are on strike and they're protesting? They don't want to give you what you need. Well, presumably there's going to be a Kina somewhere, and if you go to JJ and they're not selling any of the shit you care about, you're probably seeing something like Balloon Engine. Maybe you're seeing something like Kite. I do want to actually take a second to call out Kite as one of Stelle's best, most underplayed items. Pretty much any build for the first couple of days, you throw in a Kite, it gets you like 20 regen. Kite was one of the best items in that fight. Kite's very, very good. You can just buy Kite when nothing else is happening. I'm going to talk more about early game economy management. Please do not go buy Kite first shop. But Kite's very, very good. It helps you build into some of the fallbacks like Balloon Engine. Now, typically Stelle is so consistent that you don't actually have to have a fallback. It's the vast majority of the games where I'm either playing Ball Blaster or Karakara. Very rarely do I have to deviate from this. However, Balloon Engine is easily Stelle's third best build. The issue with it is the base burn value is absolutely miserable. However, there are a lot of ways to get that burn value moving in a positive direction, and once you've got like +5 burn on this thing, it is directly competitive with Stelle's best builds if you have any amount of support for it. Balloon Engine is not weaker than Stelle's other two builds I've been talking about. I'd actually say at pretty much every point in the run, I think Balloon Engine is stronger than a Ball Blaster build, and a high-rolled Balloon Engine is stronger than a high-rolled weapon build up until Runabout starts happening. The issue with Balloon Engine is you can't really spend the money to go into it, assuming you'll find the burn to enable it, and you also can't really reliably find it the way you can reliably find the other things. It's kind of just middle. Kina has a ton she can hit. So while Balloon Engine's very good, it's typically a thing I do as something else when I'm missing the pieces for the other builds in the first couple of days. Now that said, I'm not desperately trying to pivot out of Balloon Engine. I'm making a choice sometime around the second half of day 2, the start of day 3, about how much plus burn I have found. If I have like +4 burn on the Balloon Engine, I will ride that straight to the mid game. I will make no effort to pivot out of it. It's a very good build, and it could evolve to be one of the strongest possible things I could be doing on those days. Alternatively, if I find next to no burn support after accepting a Balloon Engine in the first couple of days, I'm going to pivot out just about as fast as I can. And very sincerely, if you're on just like the second to last shop at day 1, you have nothing going for you and see a Kite, pick up the Kite. You get a Kite, you get a Clockwork Disc. That's going to be a lot of regen over the course of a fight. Additionally, worth noting, the things I've talked about generally don't involve regen cards, but if you have a Kite, it does actually open some powerful lines for you, where Walk-in Clinic is incredibly powerful with a Kite. It's powerful with any regen item, obviously. But because you pick up the Walk-in Clinic, that will allow you to justify later on picking up a Lunchbox. And Lunchbox benefits, if it's on your board, from any regen skills you have. So while I'm not going to suggest you just randomly take regen skills, sometimes I do that if they're competing with nothing on the second page of a roll, just because they open up Lunchbox for a ton of passive regen over the course of a run, where I get like, let's say 5 chocolate bars a day on average, and every other day I get gumballs. That comes out to be about 30 regen a day from a Lunchbox with a bronze skill. It's very, very valuable to be able to pick a regen skill at all. I wouldn't recommend buying Lunchbox to get a regen skill or getting a regen skill hoping to buy a Lunchbox. I don't think either of those are optimal, but having the Kite makes that line make sense, and it gets a ton of value out of that early thing. So I'm not here telling you to play Kite day 1. You'll just get bodied by Shark Claws or somebody with a proliferating burn build if you do that more often than not. But if you have nothing, Kite can win against a lot of bad boards on day 1, and it's very important to understand when you're playing this game. You're not necessarily trying to make the absolute best board you can every single day of the game. You're trying to make a board good enough to win. And Kite can do that if you have almost nothing else on your board, and that's very important that you don't overlook Kite just because it's not what you're trying to play. So very quickly, to show off a couple of items you're looking for when you're playing that sort of Karakara build, the ideal day 1 board is probably Gunsight. Gunsight is just on its own equivalent to left or right-handed. You can get by with no weapon skills when you're playing aerial turret. You generally don't want to do that. You want to find strength, left-handed, right-handed, noisy cricket, all that jazz. However, if you can just find a Gunsight, that can make up a lot of lost time. You don't necessarily need the skills if you can just find a decently tiered Gunsight instead. Additionally, the main thing to care about after you have like just about any amount of damage for the turret itself is getting it to start up faster. There are a couple of ways of doing that. The joystick is charged as agent drones, aerial turret is a drone. So by putting this next to the aerial turret, every 4 seconds charge it for 1. Instead of going nuclear at 15 seconds, you go nuclear at 12 seconds. Hilariously, going to silver does not actually change that. In fact, it causes you to deal less damage because your first attack, it will not be flying and it will not be multicasted. You go nuclear at the same time, you just miss out on 3 attacks, or well, 2 attacks and 3 aerial buffs. So going to silver on joystick, not actually improving your build. It is not wrong to go to silver on joystick, depending on the situation you're in. Sometimes you're strong enough you can do it, and going to gold on joystick does improve the build. Additionally, silver improves the build depending on what your fly condition is. In the early game, it's generally a Karakara, but a lot of the time you pivot out of the Karakara and start using Ornithopter because it's a faster fly trigger, works better with the silver joystick, and by lowering the cooldown every second, you drop it with no other support. It would go from 15 seconds down to 12-second turbo, even faster for the joystick. And barring both of those, if you're not hitting the joystick, not hitting the Ornithopter, you can still just throw a jetpack on there and haste it every 5 seconds, which is pretty comparable to what you're getting out of a bronze joystick, but a little bit worse. And the Ornithopter I'm mentioning is a silver card. So there's a lot of small items very early in the game. They're going to help you speed up or synergize with that aerial turret. The moment you have Karakara aerial turret, you're going to be happy to start going to Andes and trying to find the supporting items for them, especially because Orbital Polisher is a bronze supporting item. Having a shiny enchant can matter in a lot of different ways in the late game, and one of the big advantages of not playing the tool line is it helps you get these shiny enchants. The tool line basically cannot solve an Orbital Polisher. And one more item I should absolutely mention being important to those aerial turret builds is darts. This is a perfectly sufficient weapon. It's not impressive. The important part of this is the toy tag right here. Because left-handed, right-handed, and strength are also powerful, having a toy means the Tiny Furry Monster event is a zero-cost, get-a-random skill event. You get to pick one from 2. This can oftentimes give you something to do when you have no money, and something that makes you dramatically more powerful if you hit big. The only other cheap toy Stelle has is the pinwheel, which is fine for the same reasons, but you're less likely to be willing to pick this up. It's not feeding towards your game plan. It's a relatively pitiful amount of regen. Again, I have picked this up, same situation as Kite, but I'm not looking to buy a pinwheel the same way I'm looking to buy a dart. Having broadly covered the most important stuff in the early game for Stelle's weapon path, I should cover at least a little bit for the 2 other paths. And funnily enough, that's the same card. That's Steam Washer. Steam Washer is a medium burn item with a cooldown of 6 seconds. It's a tool, which is important for Ball Blaster. When using another vehicle, charge this 2 seconds. So any vehicle you have suddenly starts fitting into a tool build a lot smoother with the Steam Washer. A balloon engine is a vehicle charging this, and balloon engine's not quite enough burn on its own. So whether you're playing a balloon engine or a ball blaster, both of them basically want Steam Washer on the board to help fill out the burn. The rest of the support is wildly different. With balloon engine, you're really looking for items like the clockwork disc and the paper airplane to have start-stop triggers. The same thing is true for the free fall simulator. These are the items that are going to get you a lot of triggers over the course of time. You don't just want a bunch of toggles though. Anything that gives you an initial trigger is very valuable. Kite is a great example of this. You want a mix of cards that are going to both get you more fly triggers initially and stop flying so that you can keep dealing them throughout the fight. To that end, I forgot the most important one. Forget exactly what it's called, the Firebomb. This is a stop trigger that burns. You love this to bits when you're playing Balloon Engine. It does enough burn that if you have some other burn tools going off quickly, it's perfectly sufficient in the tool build as well. Although generally you're looking to pivot out of the bomb relatively quickly if you aren't playing the Balloon Engine line. And I definitely want to give a shout out here to Parachute, which is definitely very, very good if you're playing Balloon Engine, right? It is a pretty direct upgrade over what Kite is doing, and it can give you a ton of regen over the course of the fight, easily enough to survive until your burn does its job. Parachute's actually so good at generating regen because of the half health trigger and how many flights you tend to have immediately in any sort of Stelle, that barring tool Stelle, I have frequently seen myself in pretty much every Stelle build at least consider Parachute. I have had multiple games running aerial turret Karakara stuff where my last 2 item slots weren't that important and I just ran Parachute to fill them out, and it was by far the best thing I could be doing because by the time I would get to half health, I've flown the turret, flown the Karakara, flown like an angle grinder drone and one other random thing with like an Ornithopter or a fly cycle or something, and that is at half health gain 40 regen, which is more than a lot of random item slots can do. It's not the ideal way to finish out that board, but if you have a lot of gold, you likely can afford a Parachute. And frequently in Stelle, you will have a lot of gold. She doesn't have great economy items, but what she does have going for her is that she has a tremendously good ability to say, okay, I've got my Ball Blaster to silver, or I've got my Karakara and my aerial turret at all. I don't care about new items at new tiers. I care about getting certain items about my board. The tiers don't really matter. I don't have to pursue going to shop after shop trying to get aerial turret to gold. The difference in a bronze aerial turret and a gold aerial turret is 2 silver sharpening stones. It doesn't matter that much. You want to do it if you can, but you have no obligation to improve those sorts of builds by tiering things up that much. The same thing is true to a lesser degree with Balloon Engine. The 2 burn here is nice. You're going to want that. The items like Freefall Sim, where their flight toggle matters because the higher the tier, the lower the cooldown, right? So like with Freefall, this tier matters, but the Firebomb, it's 2 burn every 4 seconds, not the biggest deal. The Clockwork Disc literally doesn't matter. You don't need to upgrade that at all. There are a ton of items in Stelle where you can say, okay, I've got the item. I don't need to go to shops for that item anymore. And typically you find yourself pursuing specific shops, usually middle, Andy, or weapons or non-weapons. You don't have to really try that hard to push your tiers on Stelle in the early and mid game once you have the item at all. And that makes it really, really easy to start banking money. And the reason I mention that is because it makes it very easy to be like, I'll spend 4 gold to use a parachute for a couple of days. Or my favorite pivot in the entire game for Stelle, Skyliner. This item's trash in the super late game. You don't ever want to be running Skyliner unless you have the most deranged acceleration for it possible after day 13, right? But on day 6, this just kills a man. Like, this is gonna say like multicast 5, burn 30, 150 damage, bare minimum. This is an insane amount of damage. I don't think Skyliner is a good build in the late game, but if you have enough money, you can just be like, I have a bunch of fly triggers. I have this dash space. I can afford to buy another large gold item today after the Skyliner. I'm just gonna buy the Skyliner and run it for a couple of days to get through the mid game. And that's not a bad strategy. It's not ideal. The best strategies will still be faster than Skyliner, but it is perfectly sufficient. It's still very, very good. Part of the reason that economy management is so important in Stelle is the ability to temporarily put in a parachute, temporarily put in a Skyliner. These things cost a lot of gold, but they can really improve your win rate, because it's important to understand that you don't really want to stick with Skyliner. The same thing is true to a lesser degree with Parachute. Parachute has built-in defenses, so it's much easier to stick with a Parachute than it is to stick with a Skyliner, but generally the best start-stop builds aren't going to involve a Parachute unless you find some crazy synergies for it. Typically, the best, most reliable endgame for a Balloon Engine is actually pivoting out of burn entirely into the Hang Glider, because since you have a ton of start-stop triggers and the base damage on this thing gets to be so large so quickly, Hang Glider is going to, 1, pivot very smoothly from your Balloon Engine build into Hang Glider, and 2, eventually you're going to have the ability to have a very explosive, very fast Hang Glider. I personally am not the biggest fan of Hang Glider as an intentional plan in the late game. It's part of why I've fallen off on Balloon Engine, is because I can't as consistently get its early game online, and closing out games with Balloon Engine can be pretty difficult. However, Hang Glider is very strong. Balloon Engine can be very strong. It's probably about the same quality in my eyes to just keep with the Balloon Engine or go into Hang Glider. It really depends on what you're being offered in the run. But either way, I don't feel great about the build super long term. Barring getting like exactly Blaze Howl Warden or an Obsidian enchant on the Balloon Engine before you find a Hang Glider, I would probably always try to go into Hang Glider over Balloon Engine in the late game, but I wouldn't feel comfortable in either of them at that point. It's why I deviate towards tool stuff with Hanger, and it's why I build towards Runabout primarily, because these things excel in the late game the way few other items do. It wasn't until I edited the video that I realized I forgot to include the supporting cards for Ball Blaster. Obviously, I've already mentioned previously that the Steam Washer is a really important supporting card, but the reason I forgot to do it is because to support Ball Blaster, what you basically want to do is you want to go to the Stelle cards that are also tools. And like broadly, it's just the entire list. You just put the fast ones on your board. Obviously, there are a lot of stop tools. There are a couple of flight-based tools. These aren't really useful, but very frequently you're gonna be like, oh, I've got 3 angle grinder trodes in my toolbox. They're 5-speed tools, sounds good to me. So a lot of optimizing the early game is just throwing the faster tools on the board. Now, that said, there are still very important cards, specifically Blowtorch, anything that burns, and especially it burns and is either a vehicle or a tool to charge the Ball Blaster or a vehicle to charge the Steam Washer. All of those are really, really valuable. Generally, Firebomb isn't good enough because Firebomb, well, runs out of ammo, but there are builds that just dump enough burn immediately because you're trying to maintain burn. You want things like Blowtorch and Steam Washer to stack up with the Ball Blaster. Also worth noting that Box Cutter is generally the highest damage weapon, and sometimes in the mid game you'll end up playing a Ball Blaster build that's less about burn and more just about delivering a lot of damage. This is pretty rare. It usually requires weird toolbox RNG for it to make more sense than the burn build, but it does happen sometimes. Flare Gun goes up there with Blowtorch for sure. This also opens up some pivots later in the run where you might want to be using this to lower the cooldown Well, in the steam washer itself, it is directly helpful, but also on stuff like the low roller with combos later with stuff like the hanger. Flare gun is a very important tool to be on the lookout for. Precision calipers is not the best, but if you're running these in like the first 7 or 8 days, the game tends to be slow enough at that point that you can have these go off. If you get a second one from your toolbox, it ends up working very, very well, but it does require a relatively slow game pace, and I'm not the biggest fan of going into them. Typically though, the best tool for your ball blaster builds is going to be the pressure heater. This is a tremendous amount of burn scaling. Very frequently, you'll find yourself with either a lighter or a blowtorch on one side and a steam washer on the other. It is a huge amount of burn scaling. It's very, very quickly because it's charging up all your tools and vehicles. This tends to be the mainstay of how you build out your ball blaster builds. Another great tool is the rivet gun. It's just very fast. It's speeding things up quite a lot. And I think it's very important to mention one more, that is the steam hose. The steam hose is a way to transition out of ball blaster, which is a pretty dedicated early and mid game card. It doesn't really have much going for it in the late game. Steam hose can scale really monstrously. It has bad base burn, like 12 base burns admittedly acceptable, but a 5-second cooldown, all the slows happen after 5 seconds. So the first time this goes off, it just burns for 12. To scale this up, you basically need to wait 10 seconds. And yes, with hangers and workshops, you can get the cooldown down. With rivet guns, you can charge it. There are ways to accelerate it, but never to be that fast. Steam hose is sort of like calipers, a little bit slow, a little bit uncomfortable before you find the ways to accelerate it. But it is such a huge amount of burn in conjunction with things like a fire hose, a weather machine, or even just a flashbang, that it is absolutely worth picking up. It'll stack to a meaningful amount of burn in the early game and maybe give you a way to pivot out of ball blaster into a huge steam hose build. And that's one of the main paths that the ball blaster tool spam can take you down. And these last couple items are also economy items, so I'll blend this section into the next one. Let's talk about Stelle's economy. Toolbox is incredible. It's generating tier-based gold per day. Typically, you want more than bronze, and getting to gold is a lot of money, so I'll usually get it to silver, sometimes get it to gold, almost never diamond, and I very rarely keep it at bronze. And it is a good amount of additional income, in addition to being able to generate some very important items. At silver, you can find flare guns, altimeters. Those are the main ones. Flare gun has a lot of synergy. You can stack multiple flare guns to do some weird things. Altimeter has a lot of synergy with Runabout specifically. If you find yourself playing ball blaster, this has tremendously more value, because essentially you just fill an entire board with blow torches and a ball blaster, and that's an incredible build for the first 8 or 9 days of the game. But yeah, Toolbox is very, very good, both for its economy, the ability to do flare guns, and the ability to generate tools to fill out your board in a ball blaster build. Next up is Wrench. This is really not like a clear economy item, but it's very hard to find yourself in a spot on Stelle where you have no tools beneath gold tier and Wrench is not upgrading something on your board. Additionally, if you're playing any sort of air build, you're gonna be able to finish a polisher, and buying a Wrench will eventually drag that thing up to gold tier. So Wrench is always a good purchase economically. However, if you are playing the tool build, it's obviously incredible. Stelle technically has 2 other economy items. One of them is a lunchbox. This is very bad at generating economy. It's more for generating regen. And since it's affected by skills like Walking Clinic that boost regen as long as it's on the board for your permanent regen scaling, it's very, very good if you have a regen skill for having, like, you can walk into a fight in the late game with 300 base regen. That's not even a high roll. That's just normal if you're doing regen skills plus lunchbox. It's not often that these things line up. It's not generally the case that you want to take a regen skill over burn or damage. But if you find yourself seeing a regen skill against either nothing or next to nothing for your build, pick up the regen skill. Try to open the lunchbox line. This is part of why getting early regen items like Kite and Pinwheel can be good, is because you can win day 1 or 2 with a regen skill, making Pip much more likely to carry your early game and then transition into lunchbox for crazy base regen. Stelle's best economy by far though is the Cloche hat. Headset is one of those items I said you should probably be holding, or I'm doing this in post, so maybe it's one of the items I'm going to say you should be holding. But it's very, very easy to have a small bronze item that costs almost nothing and have Cloche just reduce all roll cost by 2. You can also hold goggles and a couple of other items. It's not too hard to have a silver Cloche reducing by 4. It's basically automatic to have a gold Cloche reducing by 4. And it gives you a ton of gold. Stelle's not great at generating extra money. In fact, she's kind of shit at it, because she typically dumps all of that extra money into meta scaling by spending it on tools with a hammer. But what she is great at doing is saving money with Cloche and finding really effective ways to leverage the gold she does get by turning it into upgrades with the hammer. So Stelle has some pretty good meta scaling economy options, She's not the best at spending money, but I find that the way her items work in conjunction with the cloche hat, she is the best at saving money. And upgrading any item of any tier is certainly one hell of a thing to put that money saved towards. And while we're on the subject of meta-scaling items, there's one more. It's very good, but very niche. That's the drafting table. The requirement to have 3 tools, not really a big deal. You obviously never run the card on your board. It's just there so that at the start of a day, you can upgrade a lower tier vehicle or drone. The or drone part doesn't really matter for Stelle. There's no drone with a critically important tier. And in addition to that, stash space and gold can be very tight on Stelle. I typically am floating at least 40 gold going into day 6. This is because on day 6, if I see an aerodrome, I'm buying a ticket to the temple. And if I see a large gold item, I'm usually have at least one in my head that I would buy immediately. So 40 gold is like the minimum I'm comfortable going into day 6 with. So typically, I'm not the kind of guy with the stash space or the willingness to spend the gold and picking up an early drafting table. However, if you ever see a drafting table that's a higher tier than a vehicle on your board, it's an automatic purchase. If you're going to go into vehicles and you see a drafting table, right? If you're planning on doing runabout things and you see a silver drafting table and you have the gold and stash space and it's not a problem to activate it, it's usually worth picking up the drafting table. And the reason for that is because it's very possible that you'll get a couple random upgrades on your current drone-based aerial turret board, and then by the time you find the runabout, you're going to find it at silver more often than not, and you might have been able to upgrade the drafting table to gold before you got the runabout, getting you the guaranteed upgrade on the runabout. So while drafting table feels a bit more niche to me, it's very good. Do not look over this card. It's absolutely worth buying, even for stingy goobers like me who feel like 40 gold is barely enough to have going into day 6. Now, having talked broadly about the 3 main lines of the game, tools into hanger, weapons into runabout, and balloon engine into pivot, likely into hang glider, I want to talk about some of the items you should hold for pivoting. And I'm going to start with Ornithopter, but it's kind of a weird inclusion in the list. Ornithopter is not really a buy and put it in your stash sort of item because it's so fucking good that you should just put it on your board, right? If for some reason you're on a board that does not have any way to utilize Ornithopter, this line of text is somehow not improving your board, then okay, buy it and put it in your stash anyway. It'll be insane later. However, generally speaking, Ornithopter just goes on your board. I'm including in the buy it for future pivot section just in case somehow it's not obviously good on a board. Headset is in a very similar space where headset, if you're playing aerial turret, is speeding up your time on aerial turret. 2 seconds off of aerial turret by hastening it for 2 seconds is functionally 4 attacks with aerial turret, right? In an ideal aerial turret board, a silver headset might only be 2 seconds of haste. What that's actually doing is about 14 seconds into the fight, it's caused you to attack 2 more times for like 70 more damage each time, and it's multicasting. So this 1 slot silver item is basically dealing 250 damage at 14 seconds, and in the early game, that's a huge fucking amount. In the late game, if you're playing any sort of fly talking build, headset's basically the best haste enabler in the game. And if you're playing any sort of immediate start of flight build, then headset's going to be very good for 1, basically making you immune to slow, and 2, accelerating your own build. There's a lot to go into headset where ideally your runabout starts combat with a 1-second cooldown, but that's not how it actually tends to play. Similar to Ornithopter, headset's one of those items that's probably just going to go on your board, but you should buy it and hold it even if you don't have a use for it, unless you're playing tools. Tools, you can ignore this. If you're playing Brawl Blaster, it's basically inconceivable you find a world where you go into headset. But whether it's balloon engine with fly toggling or weapons with maintaining flight, headset will probably go on your board, and if it somehow doesn't, you should buy it for later when it will. In addition to obviously accelerating your board, it allows you to do very, very busted things where you haste all of your vehicles on combat start with a launch tower, for instance, or where it's the carrier for enchants like Heavy and Icy, and it is one of the best carriers in the game for that. I should also mention at Obsidian, it becomes the other half of Hang Glider, and since Hang Glider's base damage isn't all that important, this is actually kind of crazy. It's very rare that this is the best thing you could be doing, but it is actually totally valid if you have no other target for an Obsidian enchant. Although if you're eating that good, you don't need a guide. Congratulations on your free win. Next up, we have Red Lantern. This is really unique to the weapon line for Stelle. The fly toggling tends to deal its damage passively, so Red Lantern won't work. And the tool build will never have room for a Red Lantern and probably doesn't go into fight to begin with. But for the weapon build, very, very frequently you're building into Runabout, or you're high rolling with an aerial turret, or you're pivoting into a Skyliner. For all of those, even a silver Red Lantern is 40% crit chance while in flight. That's huge for one item. It costs very little. If you get it up to diamond, that's 80% crit chance. That's almost 100%. It's absurd. And very frequently, you'll find yourself in a position where in the mid game, you're getting your first enchant. You have 20% crit on a silver one of these, and you're offered like Radiant and Deadly as your enchants. You're like, wow, neither of those do anything. Slap Deadly on this thing. it'll give you another 40% crit chance without taking up the enchant slot on your main build around item. Additionally, similar to headset, the heavy enchant and the icy enchant on this is very, very good. It's obviously not as good as headset is, but in some builds, like the Runabout builds, you can have heavy going off non-stop from combat start. The same thing sort of happens with fiery for status ailments and restorative, but generally those enchants will be going on other items instead, and it's very much less likely you'll do that. Also worth noting for both the headset and the Red Lantern, they both carry the shiny enchant very well, doubling their base effect. So headset, it's effectively a turbo enchant. Here it's a deadly enchant. Either way, it's a very good thing to throw a polisher on once you finish it, if your build requires it. Flysicle is an unassuming card. It's not that impressive if you're playing balloon engine stuff. It's just a fly start every 6 seconds, right? Flysicle is a vehicle and small. Because of launch tower, that's incredibly important. Very frequently, you just need enough vehicles on your board to start flight with your Runabout, and Flysicle helps with that a lot. Additionally, you don't actually want to upgrade your Flysicle. Ideally, you actually only have a bronze Flysicle. Way down the line, if you hit the launch tower and things are going really well, you might be happy to have a higher tier Flysicle. It's not clearly wrong to upgrade it. But if things aren't going exactly according to plan and you end up playing a hang glider build instead of the instantaneous Runabout, hang glider is a 5-second cooldown. So having a base duration bronze Flysicle guarantees it goes off afterwards and it hits the hang glider. It's not the cleanest way, you'd rather just use an ornithopter, but Flysicle, between its support for hang glider to get the hang glider flying if you don't have an ornithopter, and being an integral part of getting those launch tower start of flight boards going, is absolutely worth grabbing and holding in every Stelle run. Well, not tool runs, but all the other Stelle runs. I'd also suggest buying and holding marshalling lights. Even at higher tiers, unless you're locked into a build path for how the run's going to go through or you're really low on money, marshalling lights are basically the one item you need to go into hang glider. Obviously, if you're playing tools, you don't give a shit about these. Like, yes, they are a tool, but you don't have any flight enabling, any flight stopping. You're never going to pivot from tools into hang glider. But if you're playing a balloon engine, this isn't on your board, or if you're playing a weapon build, having marshalling lights in your stash is usually the single thing you need to pivot into a hang glider. Again, if you're playing hang glider, you're probably working on a polisher. A diamond shiny marshalling lights will full stop the maximum board size you can have with a hang glider. You can put your other 6 item slots to whatever the hell you want. The start and stop is covered. A lot of people really talk up things like shiny paper airplane. Just slam your whole board back on the ground. You don't need a cool loop of paper airplane. You can just do marshalling lights hang glider, and the rest of your board could be 6 flashbangs for all I care. Obviously, it's better to have more start stop than just marshalling lights, but for the purpose of enabling hang glider, paper airplane isn't enough, and in my experience, marshalling lights is, so I always float this just to have that pivot open. And to that same end, even though I just talked shit about it, if you're expecting to go into hang glider, if that's one of your clear outs from your current position is going into a hang glider, pick up a paper airplane. It's very, very good with the hang gliding build. And yeah, it's not enough on its own, but hang glider tends to be very different from any other build. So if you have the money for it and the stash space for it, and you're expecting to go into hang glider, pick up an airplane. This is pretty unlikely. This is also very specific to the weapon build, because if you're playing balloon engine, this is probably just on your board already. But paper airplane is sometimes worth picking up. Let's move on to monster fights and how I tend to pick them. First of all, the universally true advice for selecting monster fights is obviously still true with Stelle. If there is a ticket on the board, that ticket is probably a bigger hit than anything else on offer, and it's probably right to click on the thing that has the highest chance of dropping a ticket. Barring any particular hits for your build though, generally just pursue the highest average gold value. So let's talk about what the hits constitute for Stelle. For Stelle, if you haven't picked up a build yet, if you still don't know what you're doing on day 1 when you pick your monster fight, you always click Pyro. It has a 3 out of 4 chance of dropping plus burn and a 1 out of 4 chance of dropping a lighter, which is a burning tool. Whether you're balloon engine or ball blaster, Pyro is an incredible fight. And if you don't know that you're not those things, you should be clicking on Pyro because you might be those things. Now, in the situations where you don't see Pyro or you already have Kara aerial turret, what do you do? Personally, I click on Haunted Kimono. I should probably click on Pyro and like show the items I'm talking about, huh? Anyways, going to Haunted Kimono, I actually think Haunting Flight is very, very strong. If you already have weapons, then it's incredible. If you don't have weapons, there's still a good chance this can help your build in some way down the line. But the reason Haunting Flight's very strong is it helps you during the phase of the game where you're pivoting into a Runabout. Generally, when you first go into Runabout, it's an item that's gonna like take a while to get down to like 3 or 4 seconds. It's never gonna be better than that. Haunting Flight makes that pivot period smoother by flying 1 additional item at no cost to you. and nothing else on day 1 really matters that much. Banana Bolt or Healthy Jolt doesn't really matter. The blue nanas and the duct tape can be helpful because it opens up the tiny furry monster and is a tool respectively. Healthy Jolt's just not something Stelle can enable without finding a random restorative enchant somewhere. With Viper, you can beat it for the extra gold. That's not clearly wrong. And with Inglet, there's really not a reason to go to Inglet. I also don't think there's a reason to go to Kyber Drone, as much as it pains me to say it. Trained is just not sufficient on its own to encourage you to play a slow build. I have seen Weather Machine Lightning Rod builds with like silver train, so plus 10 damage, and the gold universal skill version, the plus 4 to all weapons that you can get from the slow vendor. So plus 14 damage is slow, and it was just nowhere near enough. To really get into like a lightning rod or a slow to scale a weapon sort of build, you need way more than trained. So I don't actually care about this at all. It still has the chance of dropping the wing, the eagle talisman. Train doesn't do nothing. If I was in a situation where I was choosing between Banana Bolt, Inglet, and Kyber Drone, I'd go for Kyber. But I would almost always rather kill Viper for the guaranteed extra piece of gold, kill Pyro if I'm not already playing weapons, or kill Kimono and just hope to get a world where Haunting Flight matters. Moving on to day 2, I would pretty much always fight Aetheryte if I'm able to fight Aetheryte. Whether you're playing a burn build or a weapon build, my opinion, my experience has consistently been you bully the shit out of Aetheryte. You basically need to have a bad balloon engine build to lose to Aetheryte, or get crit twice back to back on the first 2 hits from the Aetheryte, which has happened to me. Other than that, pretty much everything you can do on Stelle, whether it's Balloon Blast or stacking burn, or whether it is just an aerial turret going off twice a second, is going to get through Aetheryte. Either you're just playing Kara wide weapons, you just have like 4 different weapons at different timings all getting buffed, you'll get right through. Ventriloquist, on the other hand, will slap you silly and doesn't have a ticket, so you're much more likely to click on something else, and usually it'll be the second fight. This is organized wrong, Road Scrapper's a leftmost fight, because Covetous Thief is good average gold value, has a chance to give you some moderately useful things, and Borger has a ticket. And again, if there's nothing else for your build, auto-click the ticket. Getting into day 3, this is actually an interesting win because you're just not beating the fights on the right, generally speaking. You might beat Hover by Cooligan. Why take the risk? It doesn't have anything you want, and Giant Mosquito will be killing you. Don't make the mistake of clicking on them to remember what they do. It's kill you. That's what they do. As for the rest of the fights on the board, there are 2 fights that are able to give you tickets. The higher odds for the ticket is Apprentice if you're choosing between them. Now, if you're not going for a ticket on day 3, you're almost always clicking on one of these 2. Frost Street Challenger can give you Snowstorm, which is very valuable. It's enough scaling to open up a lot of new lines, whether it's things with Ice Bomb being toggled or just using a Weather Machine and scaling up a Lightning Rod. Snowstorm is so much scaling that it opens up new powerful lines that are genuinely optimal. Meanwhile, the Product Demonstrator is a board of almost nothing but hits for a Balloon Engine run. Every single one of these things he can drop is good on Balloon Engine. Gunpowder is arguably the worst thing here, but it's still not terrible. And if you're playing any other build, you still want this Ornithopter very badly, so the 1 in 7, 1 in 8 at Ornithopter is still probably the best thing you can do on the day. Now, skipping through the rest of the days pretty quickly, I don't want to talk about every single thing in depth, and a lot of days there's really nothing interesting to say. On days 8 and 9, the new Cloud Top enemies are very worth clicking. If you're playing a weapon build, then Bombing Run is very, very good on the day 8. Additionally, you may be looking for a Fly Sickle or an Altimeter. I didn't mention it when talking about Runabout, but Altimeter is a very good tool in Runabout builds, because if you're flying your whole board, then Altimeter is going to be a 4-second cooldown, charge 1+ seconds on adjacent items, and the adjacent item is going to be a Runabout, so it's just going to fully double trigger the Runabout every 4 seconds, which is a lot of additional damage. If you're not playing a weapon build, probably don't care so much about the Officer. However, on the next day, it's hard to justify not caring about the Admiral in pretty much any build. The Admiral's badge is very, very strong if you actually have a use for it. It's not the most universally usable legendary item, but it certainly has boards where it does a tremendous amount of work. Flare Gun often has a use. I haven't mentioned it so far, but being an item that reduces the cooldown of vehicles, obviously this can do a ton of work. I don't tend to grab this and hold this. In tool runs, I could say that, but on tool runs, just like I talked about with the Ornithopter, it probably just goes on your board. It's a 5-speed burn item, slap that shit on your board, right? But there are absolutely situations where you hear about this. The big hits, though, are Diamond Strength and Diamond Aerial Assault, where when your items start flying, charge a weapon 1 second. Whether you're playing a Runabout build or a Hang Glider build, those are insane. And if you're playing Balloon Engine and you get Aerial Assault, you are 1 Hang Glider away from pivoting into one of the strongest possible builds in the game. While I don't generally like Hang Glider as much as I used to, I do think with Aerial Assault, it is an insanely powerful card. I'll also mention Roaming Isle on day 9 can drop Clamra. That might seem like a random thing to mention, but Stelle can make items shiny if they're small, right? Clamra being start of combat, slow 2 items for 3 seconds in a world where the only thing you're afraid of in the late game is Pig, is a really big deal. And frequently, you might find yourself in a spot where you have a free item on a Runabout board or a free item on a hang glider board. Because once those are fully done, you can just sort of flex your last few item slots. There's a little bit of room once you have everything you need covered. And a shiny camera is incredible disruption. So this is actually a huge hit if you are playing one of those builds and you are currently working on a polisher. If you're not working on a polisher and it's day 9, odds are you're not finishing a polisher. Now, in the super late game, the skills that matter to you, you'll be unsurprised to hear, Juggler, #1 on the list. Trash Titan is always worth fighting. Although sometimes you'll find yourself at a specific experience breakpoint where Trash Titan only gives 2 experience. You can get the extra experience from one of these enemies on the right. Well, not all of them, the Diamond Plus ones. It'll be worth fighting them. Lord of the Waste, also very, very good if you're playing one of those Red Lantern builds. Double crit damage is incredible. Every build wants 4% CDR, so again, a big hit there on that middle fight. If you are playing Runabout and you have not managed to find your launch tower yet, the Infernal Dreadnought can drop that, which is a huge deal. It's a 1 in 6 at it. And of course, as always, Lord Arcan is a great fight for every hero. Diamond Strength, Diamond Flurry of Blows, and Unwavering are all incredible skills in basically any build. And you can do some interesting things with thrusters and launch tower, or just thrusters and start of combat flight with a headset, right? So thrusters is very, very good here as well. And that broadly covers it for what I remember as the most important monster decisions across the game. Now, before I wrap this up, I do want to talk about the gold build around large items for Stelle and when and how to pivot, because I've seen some people expressing wanting to see how I feel about all of those and how to determine when to pivot at all. So first, on when to pivot, there are some factors that determine this. I would say there are 3 main factors, and they sort of guide every decision you make, but especially when you hard pivot into a new build, or at least pivot out half of your build into something new. Those 3 factors are as follows. The first is pretty simple. It's economy. Can I afford this? Will buying this affect my ability to make any choice other than economy choices in the next couple hours or even days? As an extension of that, do I have the stash space to hold everything I care about if I pick this up? Because sometimes you pick up something for a pivot, you have no space, you can't pick up new things to make money, and that doesn't work. So essentially, step 1, am I able to do this? Do I have the money? Do I have the space? Would inhibit my ability to make future decisions? Just isn't possible. Step 2 is, does your current build have an expiration date? If you're playing an aerial turret sort of build and you never found any acceleration, no jetpacks, no headsets, no joysticks, none of that jazz, no ornithopter, definitely, you're looking at a pretty bad build on day 5. You've gone 5 days without finding the support you're looking for. You take 15 seconds to go nuclear and tons of people are killing you before then. Suddenly every pivot's looking pretty tasty, right? If your build has an expiration date that was yesterday, you'll want to pivot. If it has an expiration date that's in 2 days, you still pretty much just want to pivot. And if it's in like 5 or 6 days, maybe we can hold off a bit. Maybe we're not in a big rush about it. And the third factor in when to pivot is, can this win on day X? X is the latest day you can have to play currently, right? Or the earliest day that you can end the run at. So if you want to go 10 wins and you're 3-3 on day 7, you have to win on day 13, at least. And there's a reason that we're looking at Skyliner right now as I talk about all this. Because if I'm on day 6 or day 7, I've got an aerial turret build. It's going pretty good. I have tons of money. I can freely pivot. I've got the stash space. And I see a Skyliner, it makes me stronger right now. But if I'm 3-3, I don't really need that Skyliner. I don't expect to win on day 13 with that Skyliner. So the decision actually becomes, do I have 60 gold or do I have 35 gold? Because at 35 gold, I'm probably not buying that Skyliner unless it's like the last hour of the day and I'm about to get paid. At 60 gold, yeah, fuck the aerial turret. Put the Skyliner in, we'll run it for a couple of days. I've got the cash to be really frivolous with these decisions for temporary power. So those are the main ways to determine when you should be pivoting. How much does it cost? Can I afford it? Is my current build going to be able to go the distance, or do I have to pivot? And if I have to pivot, how much time do I have left to pivot? And is what I'm pivoting into good enough to win, or is it just making me a little bit stronger right now? And that last one's probably one of the hardest ones. It requires a lot of gameplay, a lot of knowledge. You don't look at Skyliner and immediately say, oh, this is dog shit on day 13. You experience that and you're like, oh, yeah, that's a big number, isn't it? Runabout says 1 when combat starts. So I'm going to go through in tier list order for what I've written on the side and talk about each of the possible pivots. Private Runabout is so good that you make guides around how to optimize Private Runabout. It's top of S tier. The card's fucking busted. It will be getting nerfed. This is so strong. The fact that it has this cooldown reduction text in conjunction with good base damage and multi-cast too is absolutely wild. Its damage does fall off a bit on like day 13. You know what fixes its damage on day 13? Big guns and glass cannon, because you're going off first. This is not symmetrical. Any obsidian enchant, expert pilot. There's so many ways to scale a runabout come the late game. This card is completely insane and easily Stell's strongest, most consistent strategy. However, if you're not playing runabout because you just didn't have the things that built into it and weren't able to transition to it, Hangar's pretty busted too. It's my only other S tier large item. Hangar is a severe amount of disruption for your opponent and a severe amount of acceleration for yourself. Additionally, its enchants are very good. 50% crit chance on all your vehicles if you have a bad enchant, same argument as the Red Lantern. Crazy disruption on its status ailments, and shiny is completely broken. Not that you can ever choose to get that one, but yeah, essentially if you get a bad enchant for your item that's actually killing your opponent, it's going to be good on Hangar. Very notably, Radiant Hangar is completely cracked, and if you're playing a build with Flight and a Radiant Hangar, I believe the same thing is also true of Stell's Workshop. Yeah, it's the same thing. These items just make your build, if they're in Flight, immune to slow with the Radiant enchant, which is very cool. However, I'm not going to say that Workshop is on the same tier as Hangar. This line here that cripples your opponent is the reason Hangar is so busted and so powerful. Hangar builds are nowhere near as strong as Runabout builds, but they cripple your opponents. It's just that when you're playing the Hangar build and you hit the guy who's playing a Runabout, which is a vehicle supported by other vehicles, they kill you. They're both incredible, and the only reason I'm not out here preaching to the choir about the tool build is because it's directly competing with the arguably more consistent weapon build that directly counters it. Now, moving on to A tier, I did say that I don't think Workshop's as good as Hangar, but I think Workshop's completely incredible. Those other two items are the things you should be piloting towards so aggressively that I've talked about them enough that I don't really need to mention them. Stell's Workshop is not as good. 1 second is not as good as 1.5, obviously. Charging a vehicle or drone is very powerful though. You can make boards where this is essentially your entire board is charging one vehicle, that vehicle's next to a rivet gun charging something else, and that's very strong. If you can pick up an off-class Dinosaur from Dooley, this little dude is a vehicle and a tool, so if you can get 4 other tools on your board, or relics, then he will be self-infinite with a diamond, or with a flare gun, self-infinite with a gold workshop, so he'll just be charging himself. There will be no other targets for this effect. Of course, his base values are terrible, so you either want him like pumping a rivet gun into something else, or you want some method of constantly scaling him through your skills and the rest of the support on the board. And oftentimes the answer to that is as simple as he charges the pressure heater. But while you're definitely looking to go into Hangar, Workshop is a great thing to have as a backup to the Hangar when you're playing those tool builds. In the exact same vein, Hang Glider is an incredible backup to the Runabout. If you don't hit what you need, Hang Glider is fantastic. I've had so many games where in the mid game, I drop Kara for Hang Glider and continue playing Aerial Turret. And then suddenly, not only am I much stronger for the day that I'm on because I'm getting so much more damage scaling out of the Hang Glider and getting so much more flight and freeing up board slots for support items like flashbangs. On top of that, I'm now open to multiple pivot paths to get a much better board in the future. I can find stops to go into Hang Glider, or I can find the Runabout, which is just immediately fully enabled by the Hang Glider. You will need one more fly to catch the Hang Glider after it goes off, but Fly Cycle's base duration is pretty bad, so it will probably go off after Hang Glider if you're floating a bronze one. And oh my god, I forgot to mention Fly Cycle. It was in my notes too, I just forgot to mention it. Hold that thought, we'll get back to Fly Cycle. But yeah, Hang Glider is very good for mid-game pivoting when you're playing weapons. It's oftentimes the point that you're piloting towards when you're playing Balloon Engine. It's great in conjunction with Runabout. I have so many games that ended with Hang Glider Runabout. And I vastly prefer Hang Glider to Vortex Cannon when you're trying to support a Runabout, because Vortex Cannon will fly your opponent's items, which in a Stelle-dominated meta is a very bad thing a lot of the time. I've been talking it up all through the video, but I cannot put Launch Tower above A tier. It's too situational. The situation is basically, do you have Skyliner or Runabout? If you do, it's really good, but it does nothing on its own. It's completely busted, super powerful, but it requires a lot of support pieces. If you have a Runabout, you can make a good board with the Runabout with whatever random other shit you had. That is not true with Launch Tower. This is an item where if I see it and I am playing anything to do with flight at all, I am grabbing it. And the only exception to that is I'm playing a garbage aerial turret build. I have 23 gold on me and I see a launch tower. I'm like, I can't liquidate my stash to spend all my money not making a good build today. And I'm not even convinced it's right to not buy it in that situation, but that's how good it is. It's just situational. It needs other support to really break the game. It's not the most broken part of its own combos. However, it does have other things it combos with. Going on to my B tier, I think Skyliner is a really, really good card. I'd give this an asterisk, honestly. B tier, conditionally S tier. The condition is, what day is it? Because before like day 9, Skyliner is one of the best cards in the game. This just one-shots your opponents before... If you have a red lantern or any sort of good scaling for it, even up to like day 10, 11, it can be one-shotting opponents. It's very, very strong. But it's also relatively slow in the late game. You don't want to give your opponents this much time to play the game. So while Skyliner does hit like an absolute truck and it has a lot of overlap with other builds, so you end up pivoting into it a lot of the time, it is almost always a temporary pivot where you're hoping to pivot back out into something more powerful down the line. Mentioning Vortex Cannon earlier, I'll get to it now as well. It's in my B tier. It is an item. It gets you a lot of flight triggers, which can be enough for you. It does a lot of damage, genuinely it does. And if you have no other way to effectively enable your runabout, then yeah, at 4 seconds, this will enable the runabout guaranteed, which is not slow, and with a good enough runabout, that could be worth it for you. But because all items start flying and it is a symmetrical effect in a Stelle-dominated meta, also I once played Vortex Cannon into Party Float from Dooley and got absolutely destroyed. Yeah, it's got some really noted anti-synergy. The speed at which it scales is honestly not that high. This is plus 100 damage a second or 200 damage a second because of internal cooldown. And like, yeah, that is scaling, but it's not enough to be fast. Even in the early late game, this is not really that scary as a source of damage. So while I do rank it higher than C tier, it's got a lot of problems. Most of it coming down to slow scaling speed and symmetrical effect. And by far my most conditional B tier is the Weather Machine. It's super busted with the right support, and there are some very powerful cards like Steam Hose that build you towards the Weather Machine. But Weather Machine on its own is a totally symmetrical effect that gets your board flying, and while getting your board flying is nice, it's still going to be slowing and freezing you a lot. If you get into like an Admiral's Badge or a Radiant Hanger and there's suddenly no downside to Weather Machine because your flying board is impervious to freeze and slow, yeah, that's absolutely wildly powerful. Additionally, you can just Radiant Enchant this if it's competing with a bad enchantment, and then it will never hurt itself, it will fly itself, and at least it will disrupt your opponent far more than you at that point. It's the best source of slow and flying available to Stelle outside of the Omni Fly effects, I would say. And since there are slow scaling builds, it's very, very good. And again, with the right support, it stops being symmetrical disruption and starts just being catastrophic opponent disruption. Because this is a vehicle, it works very, very well with Hanger. It's just, before you get Hanger, this thing is really committing to a build that is not all that powerful. Because I want to be clear about this. People will talk up tool builds and act like Steam Host just kills your opponent. At 5 seconds, this goes off and does nothing. It burns them for 12, man. It's not until 10 seconds when it goes off the second time that it really does any amount of burn. And I don't know if you've heard me talking about weapon Stelle. I'm not big on letting my opponents live 10 seconds in the current meta at any point in the game. Steam Hose is sufficient and powerful, but it is not crazy fast. So the reason I have Weather Machine this far down is it's sort of committing me to a path that I don't really respect that much. It's good enough to go 10 wins, I've done it, but I don't really like it that much. With the right support, it's truly busted, but it's not super consistent. Which brings us to my C tier, and we're going to start with Daggerwing. It is the epitome of a C tier card in my mind. It's just a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast. Take your pick. If it were like a 10 or 12 second item, then it would have enough time to scale to one shot before it went off. If it were like a 6 second item, it would hit on a second time and we'd be fine. But because it's an 8 second item, it's at the like awful sweet spot of just being slow enough not to get in under anything and just being fast enough to not one-shot them. And if you have a start-stop flying build, like stay in flight and use a runabout, toggle and use a hang glider, just run a skyliner and stay in flight, like there are so many other items that basically do the same thing as Daggerwing to a better degree of effectiveness. It's not bad. I have run Daggerwing before. I've been happy with it. If I see an Obsidian one on Ayla, you bet I'll run it at least for a couple of days, usually to the finish line. But it is just rough to have that 8 second cooldown on the card. Speaking of bad cooldowns, we have the Space Laser. It's not very good. I want it to be incredible. I love this card to bits, but let's be real with ourselves. It's just too much work for too little reward. You basically have to pivot out of a maintained flight or start-stop flight build which already has a much better win condition than Space Laser, and go into Space Laser. There's a couple of really cool things you can do, especially if you're using, what are they called? Sandbags, so that you can like theoretically use this combined with a shiny paper airplane and do some really degenerate things with the Space Laser. That's one of the coolest ways to trigger it. There's a couple of bugs right now that I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to popularize them, and those can make Space Laser really broken. But generally speaking, it's almost impossible to find yourself in a situation where Space Laser is a viable win condition that is not more viable than what you're already doing. And you would never buy this hoping to pivot into it unless you had like the earliest shiny paper airplane at Diamond tier I've ever seen. I wonder if C tier is too mean to Swallowtail. It's genuinely a good card at 5-second base cooldown, 100 to 200 damage and shield depending on tier, hasting all your flying items and charging off all of your haste, which is all of your flying items. It can make some pretty disgusting combos. I've seen at least one guy hit the Radar Dome Exodia where you have a burning Swallowtail in all 3 conditions, so it's a 4x multicast Swallowtail and got embodied by it, which is like a sick holy grail to chase, but I don't think a remotely consistent build. I would say broadly it comes down to the same problem with Space Laser. This is generally going to be pivoted into from a board with a better win condition than Swallowtail, and it's fairly difficult to make an infinite from this that doesn't involve Hanger. So like in that board, yeah, Swallowtail with Hanger can do really, really gross things. It's not the Swallowtail I'm impressed by though. Swallowtail is just one of the many, many ways to make a cracked board with Hanger. And we're going to skip right over D tier to F tier. Sorry to do that to you, Observatory. The Observatory is cooldown 6 seconds to charge an item for 2 seconds, and when you use a flag item, charge this 3 seconds. So the first problem with this is that it can just charge itself, which is useless. The second problem with this is, at best, you are spending 3 item slots to charge an item 2 seconds every 2 internal cooldowns. At absolute best, it is almost always worse than that. And Stelle is very frequently very tight on board slots. I know I've mentioned like having room to do other things with like your hang glider board slots or your runabout board slots. I'm talking other small items. You could probably fit like one other thing, like an Admiral's badge or a flashbang or a random Nicola. A 3-slot item's not going to work for any sort of Stelle build. No one has room for this. Is there something sick you can do with Observatory? I've never seen it, but I'm sure it exists and you can find it. But is it consistent? Is it good? Absolutely not. And unfortunately, that's where I'm at with Radar Dome. And I feel like this is probably the thing I'm wrong about in this guide more than anything else. Radar Dome feels like it's asking too much. It wants all your items to be flying to give them these benefits, and then it doesn't actually do a good job of getting your items in flight. It takes up 3 board slots. Can it do the sick thing with the Swallowtail? Absolutely. But as far as I'm concerned, this is a way to spend 24 gold and 3 stash slots doing nothing until you finish a quest, at which point you will probably be making your board worse by running this over whatever 3 other items you already had. Radar Dome is, in my eyes, worse than Observatory because it's more expensive and is causing me to pursue things that I should not be wasting my time and effort on. I know it's better than Observatory, but genuinely I've never seen a Radar Dome build other than the one Swallowtail combo that I've been remotely impressed by. Every time I've seen somebody with Radar Dome, it has done almost nothing for them. And hey, at least they played it, because I've never seen anyone actually run Observatory. That's probably not true. I've probably seen like one and just forgotten about it. But that is broadly where I am with Stelle's build-arounds, or at least her gold wins. I cannot overstate how important items like Pressure Heater, Ball Blaster, and even Aerial Turret are. Throughout this guide, I have mentioned repeatedly that these are items you pivot out of into other items. You can absolutely go 10 with Ball Blaster still on your board, with Aerial Turret still on your board. Hell, even with Balloon Engine still on your board. All of these items, while they do fall off, if you hit enough support for them, especially good enchants and skills, these can go straight to the finish line and clear out the victory on days 10 through 12, no problem. Typically, you're better off pivoting, but that does not mean that you have to pivot if the game is going well and you're finding the support you need. And lastly, let's talk about some really weird, unintuitive stuff. A couple of things that have happened in my experience that just don't make sense that I want to clue people into. Balloon Engine builds really well into Runabout. Balloon Engine is a fly toggling build. So if you cut stuff like the Clockwork Disc and the bomb from your board, right? There's a lot more bombs I remembered, but like you're running these start-stop items for like 3 to 4 board slots usually. You just cut those and you put the Runabout on a Balloon Engine board. You've suddenly just made a board with a bunch of fly enablers and a Runabout. If you got an early enough Runabout, that's probably all you need. You have a Runabout, you have a great big pile of initial burn alongside of it. So yeah, your Runabout's a bit slow, but on day 5, if you dump 60 burn into a guy and they get Runabout down to 2 seconds, that kills them. That kills them dead. So even though it's not intuitive that Balloon Engine builds smoothly in the Runabout, it absolutely does. Additionally, I have talked at length as though Ball Blaster and Aerial Turret are two different builds. I want to be clear, in like a third of my games, I buy both of them. And in like a fifth of my games, I actually run them both at some point. The reason for this is because very frequently I will go to Ayla and they're like, hey, do you want an Aerial Turret, a Ball Blaster, or some darts? I'm like, oh God, Ayla, why? I buy Ball Blaster and Aerial Turret and click roll. And then depending on whether or not I see weapons, tools, or Kara will determine what I do. If I just see a bunch of random weapons, I stress the fuck out and go to the next store. If I see tools, I go into Ball Blaster. If I see Kara, I go into Aerial Turret. But regardless of how that store pans out, I end up finishing day one with either a tool build and Aerial Turret in the stash, or a weapon build with Kara, Aerial Turret, and a Ball Blaster in the stash. And it's very normal to find myself in a spot where I'm not finding the support I need for Aerial Turret. Be like, you know what? Just throw the bronze Ball Blaster on the board, right? 14 seconds in, usually 10 because I'll have an angle grinder or something charging it. It'll deal 50 damage, 10 burn. That's 55 damage provided no shield, no other purge effects. That's enough to meaningfully impact days like 2 through 5. That's not a minuscule amount of damage that really does matter. So even though it's not something I'm ever angling to do, I'm never running Aerial Turret and choosing to buy Ball Blaster, it is very frequently correct based on what Ayla or Middle shows you to buy Ball Blaster with the other build stuff as well, because you don't know which one you're going to find the support for, and then end up running them both briefly on the same board as you transition to a more thoroughly supported build. And to close out the guide, I'm going to randomly skipping around in some of the footage from my climb. Tomorrow I'll release a video going through most of my climb, talking about the boards I finished with and how I got there, just as like a ton of evidence for how this worked. If you want more evidence, feel free to check all my recent videos on Stelle. They're more experimental, less try hard, but broadly the same sort of things I'm saying today. But before I wrap up this video, I do want to briefly jump around through just the day one of a couple of runs and talk about how to manage economy. Because on day one, there are generally 2 to 3 things I want to do. The first thing I want to do is click on free things that are actually good. So Finn's Big Bite here is 5% health, 5 regen. 5 regen is massive. Getting a little bit of extra regen allows you to live long enough for a slow Aerial Turret to kill your opponent. Aerial Turret frequently has no defenses, so all regen is intrinsically super valuable for the build. Finn's Big Bite is by far the best non-shop click. Aside from Finn's excellent defensive option, the other things that I'm wanting to click in terms of non-shop clicks are the gain gold options. You can gain 4 gold at Jungle Ruins, or sorry, you can gain 4 gold at Strange Mushroom. You can gain 3 loot items, which is 3 gold plus upside at the Jungle Ruins. And you can also click on the crate for a random medium item, which is going to be worth 2 gold and very likely one of the items you're trying to build around. So those are the really good economy clicks. Those are the 4 events I'm trying to click if I'm not clicking on a shop. In terms of clicking on a shop, I never want to be in a situation like this where I'm clicking on Andy first. Andy has a lot of good items, a lot of good support items, but I cannot make a board that's going to excel with just items from Andy. And if I click on Andy first, I'm like, oh, I want to buy this, and I want to roll and buy this and this. I can't go to Ayla or Middle in my second shop, right? So if you go to Andy, you're kind of just going there to browse the first page and buy 1 or 2 things. It feels like a waste of time compared to those 4 big events I listed. So I would really prioritize, if it's not Ayla or Middle, taking the good options, at least until like the last 2 hours of the day. If you're on the 3rd hour of the day, you haven't gone to a shop, I don't give a shit what it's competing with. You're clicking on the shop, right? Like you have to spend gold at some point. So in this run, I immediately go to Finn. And then on the second page, we're going to see Middle's the shop. And Middle's competing with a very good thing. I like clicking on the medium chest, but you always go to Middle. And this is the exact thing I was talking about. This is a random game, by the way. I had no idea this was going to happen. When I see Kara Ball Blast, I'm like, oh man, do I really have to buy both? All right, fine. We roll and we get neither. This is a situation I've been in several times where I'm not comfortable with it. I've mentioned buying Kite. Here, Kite's not going to be very good, right? It's going to be the last of my gold to get the Kite. And then it's going to get me 9 regen, which is not enough for Bronze Ball Blaster to kill them. So I ignore it. I move on. I might go into Ball Blaster. I instantly click on Pyro. And once the Pyro goes down, I move on to my next stores and we get a Quixel. I don't like 4 gold rolls in the first 2 days. They just kind of suck. You don't have that kind of money. However, I don't currently have a build. So this is where the economy manager comes in. If I had a toy and I could click on this guy, maybe, but I have items I need. I can't afford to roll at Quixel really, but I also can't afford to go in with this build. So I might be willing to liquidate what I got, sell at Quixel, and roll for something on the second page. I might just leave without doing anything and be happy to roll at Pip and use my last shop. But here's a situation where you just have to be willing to accept 4 gold rolls sometimes. And you go into the shop, see what it tells you to do. In this case, it tells me to do Aerial Turret things, and I couldn't be happier about it. And with the last of my money, I'm in an awkward spot because, like, well, what am I supposed to do here? Bank the red lantern, run the red lantern? It's hard to say. We get the pip, we have just enough to liquidate, we get left-handed, it's very, very fortuitous. And it puts us in an awkward spot going into our fight. Obviously, for the last thing here, we are always going to be going to the jungle ruins. There's not really a way around that. Because we have no money with which to go to Kina, we take the loot items, hoping for sharpening stones, and eagle talismans get literally nothing. I see medkits and extracts, I feel like, all the time on Kina. And this is a great example of what I mean when you have to be, like, very clear on how you want to navigate your economy on this character. Where I don't have a full board. I'm very happy with the choices I made. But if I had gone to that Andy, I don't get an aerial turret today. I don't get a build today, period, end of story, right? And while this is absolutely not what I want to be doing, this is still a build that's going to go nuclear eventually. I have a very, very good shot of killing this Vanessa whenever I eventually click on them. And you can see that I thought about it for a while before eventually taking the lantern off my board. Taking the lantern off my board delays my turret by one activation and 2.5 hits, basically, because I lose the Karakara buff and 2 hits. However, it gets me the hit here, which is 50 damage plus 10 burn. That's 100 damage. And my build is slow enough that I decide that's probably a net gain, especially if somebody's very, very tanky and it comes down to Sandstorm. I'm not killing quickly anyway. End up going with this. And I'm ending day 1 with a grand total of 1 gold in my pocket. And while I do have things liquidate, it was a last hour economy event. It's really important that you evaluate what your future stops are going to be, because I cannot overstate this. Andy is an incredible shop. He sells gun sight, he sells control stick, jetpack, a very early orbital polisher. There's so many things I can get at Andy and be thrilled to have. And hell, clockwork disc isn't bad either. But you basically can't go to Andy in the first half of day 1, because if you do, especially if you see middle and Ayla on the second hour, you completely wrecked yourself. But you don't know how your economy is going to play out. Economy in day 1 and day 2 is very, very tight. I tend to be floating huge amounts of gold by day 5. But day 1 and day 2, be careful with your economy. Stelle is by far the strongest early game hero. But if you consistently fail to assemble ball blast or tool builds, you consistently fail to assemble Karakara plus aerial turret things, that is not those builds being inconsistent. That is you being bad with what choices you make for your economy and your shops on day 1. Tomorrow, when I post the video analyzing all of my games during the climb, you will see an overwhelming majority of day 1s. I have a completed dangerous board with either ball blaster or aerial turret. Manage your economy right. Stelle is stupid consistent. You just have to know what choices to make. And that means not going to shops that are great sometimes, unfortunately. A huge part of why Stelle is currently the strongest character is because Middle and Ayla are so strong for her on day 1. And Ayla's not falling off once Silver Runabout enters the pool, let me tell you. Anyways, for now, I've been going about an hour and a half pre-editing. I imagine the guide's quite long, so I'm going to wrap it up, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with the replay analysis. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. It also occurs to me that I forgot to do a call to action as always. If you made it this far, sub for more content just like this, and drop a like on the video. It really does help it get more traction, help the channel grow, and I really do appreciate it. Anyways, that's all for now. Peace.